In the year 2045, humanity reaches the place it has long looked at from Earth and decided, we will live there. This is the Times Lunar Aurora Asterisk, an international lunar transport and habitat complex bound for the Moon's South Pole. The craft that carries the first permanent colony is part ship, part factory, part hospital, and part ark. It will not cross light years. It will cross time, the short, sharp years in which a small group of people transform a foreign, airless place into a home. The mission begins in high Earth orbit, where reusable heavy-lift shuttles, electromagnetic tethers, and orbital assembly yards have made routine what once took whole national budgets. High above, under the thin blue curve of Earth, the Times Lunar Aurora Times is assembled like a living machine, a central spine of radiation-hardened modules, clusters of inflatable habitat rings, raw material capture drones, and a backbone of power and propulsion chemical ascent engines, plasma thrusters for orbital adjustments, and reaction control clusters for the delicate landings ahead. There are 1,200 people on board: engineers, planetary scientists, medical specialists, hydroponic agronomists, miners, teachers, a small cohort of artists, and 120 children. Among them are multinational crews, paid by a coalition of space agencies, private companies, and civic foundations. Each person carries not only a name and a set of credentials, but also a role to start the processes that will turn the Moon from a place we visit to a place we inhabit. 15 days after leaving low Earth orbit, the Times Lunar Aurora Times performs its translunar injection burn. The burn is clinical and precise, a matter of minutes, of meters per second. The Moon rises against the black backdrop, larger and more textured than it ever appears from the ground. The trajectory lines are plotted to arrive near the Shackleton Rim, a set of peaks on the South Pole that, because they catch near continuous sunlight, have become the obvious real estate for power collectors and communications relays. Within the permanently shadowed depressions below those rim peaks lies the prize, water ice, locked in the cold for billions of years, like a frozen ledger of the solar system's past. The transfer to lunar orbit takes 2 days. The transit feels short compared to the slow generation ship fantasies of old. But in those 2 days, the colony makes the mental transition. Families reconfigure sleeping pods from launch, stacked to long-term domiciles. Kids peel off courseware lessons on lunar geology and spacesuit operation. The ship's command deck cycles the main living facilities online: a medical center with regenerative life support, a library, and virtual reality civic hall for meetings broadcast across time and continents, schools with mixed reality tutors, and the vertical farm's multi-tier aeroponic towers that will feed the first cohort. At T-18 hours to descent, engineers bring the solar arrays online to supplement the lander's power banks. A modular descent stage, the Times Tethys Times lander, detaches. Over the next 6 hours, using a combination of retro-rockets and precision radar mapping, it lowers itself to a small plateau on the rim of Shackleton. The landing site was chosen because the plateau receives near-continuous sun, excellent for solar arrays, and has immediate mechanical access to the shadowed PSR, the permanently shadowed region, via an engineered shaft and subsurface elevator system that will be bored in the weeks to come. Touchdown is clean. A quiet cheer reverberates through the Times Lunar Aurora Asterisk. The first boots bottoms of the new mission suits touch down on lunar regolith, whose grains have not felt human weight for epochs. The sunlight is sharp and white. Every shadow there is absolute. The contrast is dazzling. The first 100 days building, mining, and making breath. The first 100 days on the Moon are all about making the base survivable and redundant. Surface teams erect solar towers that rotate to follow the low-arcing polar sunday. These towers, narrow and highly efficient, are tethered to the rim by flex bridges that double as conveyors for regolith and cargo. The initial base is compact, an array of inflatable habitats built with prefabricated lattice and regolith-sintered shielding over them to stop micrometeorites and reduce radiation dose. Beneath those habitats, crews deploy the first of what will become a network of shafts, insulated access points that thread down into the permanently shadowed regions where temperatures hover near -240 degrees Celsius and ancient ice lurks. Water is the first and greatest prize. The mining rigs, essentially autonomous drill rigs in 6 places around the rim, begin their slow work. heat, sublimate, capture water vapor, condense, refine. Within 3 months, the base is producing liquid water at rates sufficient to support the life support scrubbers and, critically, to electrolyze hydrogen and oxygen for fuel and breathable air. This is the essence of autonomy, to turn something that looks like cold rock and darkness into the cycle of life. Electricity comes from the rim arrays and from a micro-modular fission reactor, the size of a bus heavy, carefully shielded, and always the backup. The polar sun is low but persistent. Unlike equatorial landings, the South Pole offers long seasonal vistas of continuous sunlight on its peaks. For year 2045, the hybrid solar fission approach is perfect. Constant power for life support and industrial operations, with solar trimming the reactor's load. Food is produced in stages. The first months rely heavily on stored, optimized rations ferried from Earth. Yet already, the aeroponic towers feed supplementally. Lettuce, dwarf wheat, high-protein sprouts, and spirulina algae grown in closed cycles. Food scientists on board coax hardy cultivars out of controlled microclimates. They run genetic and phenotypic experiments intended for the long term. Crops that thrive under low atmospheric pressure, under enhanced carbon dioxide levels, and that rely primarily on LED spectra tuned for polar sunlight. Food waste is processed by biodigesters. Methanogens are harnessed in sealed bioreactors for fertilizer and as a component of energy systems. Emergency redundancy is everywhere. The base duplicates every critical system, stores spare components in regolith buried vaults, and places repair drones on standby. Communication arrays keep a near-continuous low-bandwidth feed to Earth. The one-way light time is 1.28 seconds on average, instant on human scales. But even that tiny gap feels different the first time you try to call home, and remember that every Earth-based laugh and sigh comes with a fraction of a second delay. Population, governance, and rules. From day one, the Times Lunar Aurora Times operates under a charter, an international compact that is at once legal framework, moral code, and procedural guide. The charter sets out governance, a democratically elected council, a rotating technical command, and a space civic assembly where every adult has a voice. The charter defines reproductive policy, labor allocation, resource accounting, and emergency powers. There are rights and there are responsibilities. There are also protocols for the difficult choices. Population management is pragmatic. The initial cohort of 1,200 has been selected for variety, genetic diversity, a wide range of clinical specializations, and a balance of ages. Reproduction is allowed, but it is guided. Genetic counseling is mandatory. Genomes are sequenced to screen and plan for hereditary conditions that could be amplified in a closed, small population. Families are encouraged to keep offspring between 1 and 3 children to maintain controlled population growth without bottlenecking genetic diversity. Cryopreserved gametes and embryos from Earth are stored in seed vault style at the base to provide genetic reservoirs for future generations. Housing is assigned to minimize genetic and social clustering. The command center apportions living modules, mixing families from different origins and careers to encourage cross-pollination of ideas and genes. Community rotation programs move residents through different work modules, farming, maintenance, industry, education, to avoid the formation of age or skill clusters that could destabilize the social fabric. Discipline is humane, but firm. Failure to follow safety protocols, donning suits before evacuations, maintaining airlock procedures, following radiation limits is a threat to everyone. Sanctions are designed to repair behavior and reintegrate violators. Criminal justice is restorative first and punitive when necessary. The overriding ethic is clear. The survival of the whole is the first law. Microbes, closed cycles, and the invisible evolution. The base's biologists watch microbes with the same vigilance they give the solar arrays. The closed ecological systems of the Times Lunar Aurora times the aeroponic towers, the waste recycling digesters, the air scrubbers are miniature worlds in which bacteria reproduce thousands of generations per year. In the hum of the base, invisible ecologies shift and adapt far faster than the human occupants. At first, bacteria are allies, nitrifying microbes, cellulose digesters, carbon dioxide fixing cyanobacteria in algae vats. But the very nature of closed systems means selection pressures are intense. Biologists run continuous genetic surveillance, isolating lineages of microbes that shift toward pathogenicity or lose functional traits critical to the system. They rotate microbial strains, use targeted bacteriophage therapy to nudge populations back to a healthy balance, and maintain cryolibraries of ancestral microbiomes. The first year brings one scare. A strain of wastewater bacteria evolves to clog membranes in a primary recycler. Within 9 weeks of detection, technicians repair membrane modules, apply targeted bacteriophages, and restore balance, a near miss that cements the need for real-time genomic monitoring. The human microbiome evolves too. Colonists' gut flora adapts to processed aeroponic diets and recycled water. Some microbial functions become less redundant, others intensify. Physicians track these changes closely. Proactive probiotics and occasional microbiome transplants from the Earth seed vaults maintain a pool of microbes that have co-evolved with humans for millennia. Gravity, health, and the long view. The Moon's gravity is 0.165 grams, about 16.5% of Earth gravity. That sliver of pull is life-altering. On day 1, you can hop twice as high as on Earth. On day 100, you begin to notice bones losing density. The Times Lunar Aurora Times anticipates this. Habitats include a rotating centrifuge module, a ring 60 meters, about 197 feet, in diameter spinning to provide between 0.6 and 1 grams, 60 to 100% of Earth gravity for up to half the crew's scheduled day. The medical regime is intense. Resistance exercise devices, pharmacological agents that moderate bone resorption, and gene therapy trials that aim to replicate the mechanical sensing of bone cells. Older adults are monitored for arterial changes. In low gravity, blood distribution shifts, venous return is easier, but certain orthostatic mechanisms atrophy. The colony solves these problems with medical vigilance, but it cannot make everyone Earth-like. Over the first decade, a distinct pattern emerges. Those born on the Moon, the first babies delivered under domes buffered from vacuum, show quicker mastery of microgravity movement, longer limbs proportional to body length, and different vestibular development. The first newborn, a girl born in the second year and named Astor Times by her parents and the whole base, becomes a symbol. The first lunar native child, a living index of human adaptability. Medical teams debate the long-term trajectory. Will human bodies on the Moon become taller and more gracile, with thinner bones and altered cardiovascular norms? Or will the colony's mixed regime of daily centripetal gravity and surface exposure preserve Earth-like physiology? The decision is deliberate. For the first year, 25 years, the base keeps rotations high. Children spend scheduled hours each day in the 1G rings, 1 times Earth gravity, to anchor their growth patterns toward Earth norms. It is both a medical choice and a cultural one, to keep a bridge between the Moon and Earth in body as well as in blood. But adaptation is a two-way street. Surface workers who spend months in suits compiling regolith for sintering, or who live in the rim communities with less access to the centrifuge, show measurable differences. More efficient oxygen usage at low atmospheric pressure, altered stride dynamics, and a tolerance for long, low-angle sunlight in polar conditions. By year 2060, anthropologists on the base will call this the first martingale of lunar phenotype, a suite of traits, physiological, cultural, and behavioral, that starts to delineate lunars from Terrans. Industry, making things from Moon stuff. True sustainability requires industry. Within the first 5 years, the base masters in situ resource utilization, ISRU, extracting water from ice, reducing regolith to extract iron, aluminum, and oxygen, sintering regolith into bricks and tiles, and fabricating components with 3D printers that use powdered basalt and recycled polymers. The regolith is a builder's dream and a hazard. Sharp and clingy, it grinds seals and fouls equipment. So the first manufacturing lines are devoted to dust mitigation, electrostatic cleaning chambers, sacrificial seal linings, and magnetic filters for metallic particles. Beyond that, sintering ovens take regolith, mixed with a binder, and create insulating blocks for radiation shielding. Construction teams build workshops and storage caverns under a protective regolith shell, the first subsurface neighborhoods. These underground vaults reduce radiation exposure and thermally stabilize habitats against wide lunar temperature swings. Fuel is manufactured from hydrogen and oxygen produced by electrolysis of water. With a network of orbital tugs at L1 and L2, the base becomes a refueling node. Small tugs shuttle cargo between the lunar surface and the Earth-Moon Lagrange stations, trading resources for manufactured goods. Over the first 15 years, this economy evolves from purely supply-centered to exchange-centered. The Moon exports rare metals and manufactured isotopes, exports water processing expertise and, importantly, experience the human know-how of living off-world. Mining becomes a major enterprise too. The PSR ice deposits are finite across accessible sites. The base learns to balance extraction with preservation. Simultaneously, there's a push to locate and exploit volatile rich deposits at other polar shadowed spots. Prospectors, robots, mostly, but supervised by humans, look for ammonia, organics, and analytes that can feed chemical manufacturing. By year 2055, a small chemical plant on the rim is producing propellants that reduce supply dependency on Earth rockets by a measurable fraction. Culture, ritual, and the new mythos. You cannot terraform a society with machines alone. From the first month, rituals appear. The lighting, a public ceremony when a new solar tower comes online. Pebble days when people take small stones from Earth and set them into a commemorative archive on the rim. The naming of the firstborn community gatherings to bless and record lunar births. The lunar civic calendar introduces the term L-Day, the anniversary of touchdown that becomes a public holiday with music, story, and shared meals. Language shifts, technical jargon becomes slang. Terran idioms are reshaped by the environment. Down no longer always means toward Earth's gravity. Rim time enters common speech to denote the work cycle around the crater's sunlight. The children born and raised under the rim's sky invent rhyme chants used to explain safety procedures. They paint murals under the sintered basalt that depict the planet Earth as a small blue circle. Art matters. The first art installation is a mosaic built from sintered glass cullets that reflects the slanted polar sun, catching light like a starfield. Songs arise that blend languages, Spanish choruses, Mandarin bridges, English verses, a cultural syncretism that reflects the Foundation's international origins and the new shared identity. By year 2065, the lunar populace will have written plays, staged festivals, and composed music that can only exist on a world where you hop for joy and where the night sky is always a picture of home. Education, apprenticeships, and the next generations. Education is both a civic duty and an economic necessity. The colony's pedagogy blends Earth curricula with trades training. Kids spend as much time in hydroponics and robotics labs as they do on literature. Apprenticeships begin early. By year 2060, a child of 10 might spend afternoons with mining crews, learning drone telemetry, or in additive manufacturing, seeing how a structural panel is made from regolith and heat. There are moral and social rules around parenting and labor. To prevent age clustering and social stagnation, births are scheduled and careers rotated. Parents must pass technical certifications before their children are allowed greater freedom outside the airlock. This creates a culture where civic competence is celebrated. The highest honors go to those who maintain life support, those who repair the centrifuge, and those who tame the harvesters. Education also carries the weight of memory. The base builds an archive of Earth sound, language, seeds, and something else, the history of why they left. The archive is both practical and symbolic. It stores technical blueprints in case of catastrophic loss, and it preserves the long human story for those born in the shadow of Shackleton. Crises and resilience. No sustained outpost is free of catastrophe. Within the first decade, the base experiences a major emergency. A micrometeoroid barrage in a localized area pierces a communications relay and ruptures a small habitat. Emergency protocols work, but 3 people die when a pressure seal fails during the evacuation. The loss is profound. The community institutes new safety redundancies, redesigns seal materials, and changes the evacuation protocol. The deaths become part of a public narrative that binds the community. Memorial walls are built inside the regolith caves, and names are recited on L-Day in a somber rite. Another crisis comes in the form of psychological stress. The polar environment, the long hours, and the steady stream of maintenance tasks create chronic fatigue and an increased rate of depression in a subset of the population. Clinical psychologists implement a multi-tier program, structured daylight cycles, using full-spectrum lighting, social time mandated in rotation, expanded virtual reality contact with Earth, including immersive family experiences, and, importantly, a living wage and creative outlets. Over 5 years, these interventions lower clinical depression rates to levels comparable with Earth-bound remote stations. Technical failures test redundancy. A primary recycler fails, and not all spare membranes are compatible. Improvisation and the community's fabrication shops keep the system alive. The incident strengthens the small industry culture. Mechanical ingenuity becomes a civic virtue. The weaning of artificial gravity and physiological policy. A central, controversial policy emerges in the 2060 seconds. How much Earth gravity to preserve? The initial decision to keep daily access to 1G rings, 1 times Earth gravity, through ring centrifuges was driven by medical caution. But maintaining that artificial gravity is energy expensive and, increasingly, a barrier to creating a fully lunar-adapted workforce for surface operations. A policy, the Gravity Weaning Protocol, is debated publicly, ratified by the Assembly, and implemented in stages. Over 20 years, the protocol gradually reduces scheduled centrifuge time for young adults who will be surface specialists. They go through a phased desaturation program. Weeks at a time, they acclimate to 0.165 grams, about 16.5% of Earth gravity, followed by monitoring for bone density loss, cardiovascular changes, and electrolyte imbalances. The policy is not compulsory. It is voluntary and incentivized. Those who choose to wean receive specialized training and telemedicine support. The goal is practical. Create a cohort of humans whose bodies are optimized for sustained fieldwork on the lunar surface. By year 2075, 2 generations in, phenotypes diverge subtly. The rim dwellers who keep a high G schedule retain closer to Earth body profiles, while the surface specialists gain mechanical and morphological adjustments that make them better at long extravehicular tasks. More efficient energy use, smaller but denser muscle clusters at load-bearing sites, and greater flexibility in the ankles and knees for hopping and bounding across regolith. Trade, travel, and the lunar economy. Economic life forms. The base's trade networks mature. Orbital tugs exchange propellant and precision parts with cis-lunar stations in return for processed oxygen and sintered building blocks. The base incubates small industries, a catalyst plant that produces a rare isotope used in precision optics, a fabrication bureau that manufactures radiation-hardened components, and an agriculture export, a nutritional algae used in Earth niche markets for its purity and unique flavor profile. Tourism begins. Short, highly regulated tourist missions arrive by the late 2060 seconds. Scientists and paying guests spend a week in pressurized habitats and 6 hours in shaded viewing platforms to observe the Earthrise over Shackleton's rim. Tourism is heavily taxed and curated, but it becomes an important source of revenue that underwrites seed vault expansions and cultural programs. The lunar economy is not just goods and services, it is information. The base sells geologic surveys, aged ice core samples for paleoclimate research, and telemetry from long-term automated sensor arrays that measure micrometeorite flux, solar wind activity, and subsurface thermal gradients. The archive and the first lunar births. The first lunar births are community events. Medical teams, midwives trained in microgravity, obstetrics, and the station's biostatisticians monitor growth curves and health outcomes. The first 10 babies are recorded in a public registry. Each birth is marked by the planting of a ceramic token in a subterranean garden, a patch of green grown under LEDs, and sealed in transparent domes for those who become elderly. The first child, given a widely celebrated name, is times Aster Lunae asterisk, often shortened to Aster, a name that becomes both symbol and census marker for an entire cohort of lunar natives. The archive stores these births as a measure of success. Genetics records, growth metrics, microbiome samples, and family stories are cataloged. New rituals appear. sending the first picture of a newborn's hand to Earth as an offering to the ancestors, and creating playlists of music born from both home planets. These rituals hold the local culture together through the long nights and dayless hours of technical toil. 50 years on a mature outpost. By year 2095, the colony has matured into a functioning, semi-autonomous lunar republic. The initial 1,200 has grown to 8,600 residents through births, transport, and carefully scheduled migration from Earth. The population structure is broad: families, single specialists, retired engineers who now teach, and entrepreneurs who run fabrication shops. The base, now a cluster of rim and subsurface habitats stretching across 3 connected plateaus, supports education systems, courts, multi-genre theaters, and a civic assembly that votes on budgets, research priorities, and immigration quotas. The economy is robust. The mining of polar volatiles flows into the cis-lunar economy. Exported products support an expanding manufacturing sector. Radiation shielding tiles, sintered glass, and precision optics made with lunar dust are all sold to orbital manufacturers. The colony is still dependent on Earth for certain high-complexity medicines and some microelectronics, but those dependencies shrink each decade. Politically, the colony negotiates new standing with Earth governments and the orbital stations. It becomes a testing ground for legal frameworks about resource use, environmental protection of extraterrestrial landscapes, and the rights of off-world citizens. The Constitution of the Lunar Assembly, drafted in a large subterranean council chamber under the name the Shackleton Accords, gains recognition as a foundational document in space law discourse. The long shadow of home. Despite success, a cultural shadow remains. The memory of a blue planet hangs over every communal decision. People still celebrate Earth anniversaries. Children learn continental geography by projected daylit mosaics of Earth orbit. The connection matters politically and emotionally. Donors from Earth, family networks, and cultural heritage all remain tethered. This tether will, in some ways, ensure that the lunar community builds institutions that are accountable and humane. Yet the social psychology of distance matters. Earthly news reaches the moon in an instant. Yet over the decades, the lunar frame develops its own timelines and priorities. Urgent problems on Earth, fast political conflagrations, market crashes arrive as background noise. The moon's timekeeper runs on a different rhythm: maintenance cycles, harvest cycles, and the slow, exacting rhythm of mining ice. Looking toward year 2100, legacy, identity, and a new normal. As the century closes, the Times Lunar Aurora Times mission, which began in year 2045, is no longer a single project but the foundation of a persistent human presence. The base has expanded into an archipelago of rim plateaus and subsurface neighborhoods. By year 2100, there are educational institutions that grant degrees recognized on Earth, a small but growing export economy, and a public life that includes theater, competitive sports adapted to low gravity, and a literature that genres itself as polar fiction. Medical research on low-gravity physiology informs Earth medicine. The colony becomes a center for aging studies. The reduced load on joints in low gravity leads to novel therapies for arthritic patients on Earth. Biotechnologies developed to keep closed ecosystems stable are licensed for remote or damaged regions back on Terra. Culturally, the lunar population refers to themselves with a variety of names: Lunites, Rimfolk, Polarites, each name carrying subtle ideological connotations. Some cling to Earth identity, others assert a distinct lunar identity. The first full generation who have only ever lived on the Moon Graduate University, serve in municipal offices, and travel as representatives to orbital summits. They are the first humans to think of the Moon as something more than a satellite. What changed and what stayed the same? Technically, the Moon became habitable because of 3 things: energy reliably harnessed from the polar sunlight, abundant water in hidden cold traps, and the engineering capacity to translate raw regolith into shelter and hardware. Socially, what made the colony sustainable was not just technology, but the governance systems that tempered individual freedom with collective responsibility, the culture that made redundancy an ethic rather than a chore, and the rituals that turned risk into meaning. Certain human truths endured. People still fall ill. People still argue over scarce decisions. People still find love, create art, grieve, and celebrate. The times Lunar Aurora times people made new rituals because human ritual making is the thin film that turns a collection of individuals into a polity. The first centuries of a new presence. If the short story of year 2045 is about building the camp and holding the candle, the long story is about what that candle lights. By year 2100, the moon is no colony outpost, but an incubator for a species with multiple homes. The science done in Shackleton's light advances planetary science, climate science, and material science. The people who were children when the descent took place become the captains of mining caravans, the authors of the colony's first legal codes, and the parents who teach new children to tether and to love the strange tilt of a polar dawn. They have learned, in the slow and costly way that all social learning does, that living off Earth requires more than machines. It requires governance that is fair, social design that is resilient, diets that sustain and delight, and an ethic that accepts that sacrifice is sometimes necessary but never beyond question. Above all, the colony kept one decision at its core: to treat the moon not just as a resource plateau, but as a homeable place, a place to build memory, create culture, and pass along something of what Earth gave them to the children who grew up with a thin blue planet always visible on the horizon. The closing sequence, preparing for the next steps. At the close of the century, the colony's vision committees do what explorers always do. They look outward again. Plans are drawn for small orbital manufacturing rings built with lunar-derived materials. There is growing interest in linking lunar water production with deep space missions as a refueling hub. There are ideas for more sophisticated greenhouses, for larger centrifuges that could host ships, and for cooperative research platforms with Mars missions. But in the immediate present, in the voice that narrates this account, the moon has already ceased to be purely an experiment. It is a place where a child named Astor will teach her own children about sealing procedures, where a retired engineer will run a small bronze casting shop that makes sundials from sintered glass, where a family will light a candle on L-Day and look up to Earth and feel the ache of a distance that is both tiny and infinite. The times Lunar Aurora